Hi everybody, time for Little House again. Make sure you get your book and your trifold. We're going to be on chapter 4 on the back side today, and your vocab sheet. And the word we are looking for is wicker. W-H-I-C-K-E-R. I will tell you that this kind of wicker is not furniture. That's W-I-C-K-E-R. And that is furniture we put on our patios is often made of braided thin wood called wicker. This is not. This is something, it's a verb, and it has to do with an animal. So we are going to look for the word wicker, and when we're done, we are going to do the main idea, which we've done before, the most important thing or idea in our chapter. And we are looking for who or what the chapter was about. We always write one or two words, and then what did that person do that or thing do that was so important. And then you're going to have to write your own sentence at the end of it. But we've done main idea a lot, so this one won't be too difficult. So let's go to chapter 4, a prairie day. A prairie day. Now that they found Jack back, they're going to camp for the day and find about and explore things on the prairie. I like this chapter because for us it's very easy to visualize what it looks like, because it looks like a lot of Nebraska land, especially if you've been out in the country. You're going to hear about animals, birds, critters, and other grasses and flowers that you're a little more familiar with, because they are very common in the wilder parts of Nebraska. If you've been to any of the state parks or out on the edges of farmland, you get to see a lot of these animals. So most of the time my kids in my class are a little more familiar with the prairie, and so this is a fun chapter to visualize and think to yourself, oh, I've seen those. Soft wickerings, there's our word, were close to Laura's ear, and grain rattled in the feed box. Pa was giving Pet and Patty their breakfasts. Back, Pet, don't be greedy, he said. You know it's Patty's turn. Pet stamped her foot and nickered. Now, Patty, keep your own end of the box, said Pa. This is for Pet. There was a little squeal from Patty. Ha! Got nipped, didn't you? Pa said. Served you right. I told you to eat your own corn. Even horses have trouble sharing. Mary and Laura looked at each other and laughed. They could smell bacon and coffee and hear pancakes sizzling, and they scrambled out of bed. Mary could dress herself, all but the middle button. Laura buttoned that one for her, and then Mary buttoned Laura all the way up the back. They washed their hands and faces in the tin wash basin on the wagon step. Ma combed every snarl out of their hair while Pa brought fresh water from the creek. Then they sat on the clean grass and ate bacon and pancakes and molasses from the tin plates in their laps. Molasses was the prairie version of maple syrup. As you know, maple syrup comes from maple trees, and it is boiled and sugar is added until it gets that dark color, and it's nice and sweet and wonderful to eat. You couldn't get maple syrup very much on the prairie because there weren't maple trees. There weren't a lot of trees on the prairie, to be honest, and what there were used for building with stuff. So they used molasses, which is made out of a plant, sorghum, and it is also boiled down, and it is until it's a very dark color. It's very, very thick, and it doesn't move very quickly. It pours extremely slow out of the container, so hence the saying slow as molasses in January. And it was used as a sweetening. Now, if ask mom or dad if you happen to have any in your house. I don't know if you do. I do because I bake a lot. And see if they'll let you try just a little bit. Don't try a lot, just a little bit on your finger, and see what you think about molasses. And if you do try it, tell me what you thought. when you respond to the seesaw activity. Um, and whether or not you think it was a good sweetener, if it would have made pancakes taste better, I'm just going to let you leave that up to you and let you try. All around them, shadows were moving over the waving grasses while the sun rose. Meadowlarks were springing, meadowlarks, our state bird, were springing straight up from the billows of grass into the high, clear sky, singing as they went. Small, pearly clouds drifted in the intense blueness overhead. In all the weed tops, tiny birds were swinging and singing in tiny voices. Pa said they were called Dixisels. Dickie, Dickie, Laura called back to them. Dickie bird. Eat your breakfast, Laura, Ma said. You must mind your manners, even if we are 100 miles from anywhere. Pa said mildly, It's only 40 miles to Independence, Caroline, and no doubt there's a neighbor or so nearer than that. 40 miles, then, Ma agreed. But whether or no it isn't good manners to sing at the table or when you're eating, she added, because there was no table. There was only the enormous empty prairie with grasses blowing in waves of light and shadow across it and the great blue sky above it and birds flying up from it and singing with joy because the sun was rising. And on the whole enormous prairie, there was no sign that any other human being had ever been there. In all that space of land and sky stood the lonely, small, covered wagon. And close to it sat Pa and Ma and Laura and Mary and baby Carrie eating their breakfasts. The mustangs crunched their corn, and Jack sat still, trying hard not to beg. Laura was not allowed to feed him while she ate, but she saved bits for him, and Ma made a big pancake for him of the last of the batter. Dogs did not eat dog food back then because, well, there wasn't any dog food back then. You fed them what was left over from your table. Not the best for a dog diet, and dogs didn't live nearly as long as they do now, but that's the way it was. Rabbits were everywhere in the grass, and thousands of prairie chickens. But Jack could not hunt his breakfast that day. Pa was going hunting, and Jack must guard the camp. First, Pa put Petty and Patty on their picket lines. Then he took the wooden tub from the side of the wagon and filled it with water from the creek. Ma was going to do the washing. Then Pa stuck his sharp hatchet in his belt. He hung his powder horn beside the hatchet. He put the patch box and the bullet pouch in his pocket, and he took his gun on his arm. He said to Ma, Take your time, Caroline. We won't move the wagon till we want to. We've got all the time there is. He went away. For a little while they could see the upper part of him above the tall grasses, going away and growing smaller. Then he went out of sight, and the prairie was empty. Mary and Laura washed the dishes while Ma made the beds in the wagon. They put the clean dishes neatly in their box. They picked up every scattered twig and put it on the fire. They attached the wood against a wagon wheel, then everything about the camp was tidy. Ma brought the wooden pannikin of soft soap from the wagon. A pannikin is another word for a box. And it was a box with a lid, and you took the lid off, and inside was this soft, homemade, yucky smelling soap. She kilted up her skirts and rolled up her sleeves, and she knelt by the tub on the grass. She washed sheets and pillowcases and white underthings. She washed dresses and shirts, and she rinsed them in the clear water and spread them on the clean grass to dry in the sun. Mary and Laura were exploring. They must not go far from the wagon, but it was fun to run through the tall grass in the sunshine and wind. Huge rabbits bounded away before them, birds fluttering up and settling again. The tiny dicky birds were everywhere, and their tiny nests were in the tall weeds. And everywhere were little brown striped gophers. These little creatures looked soft as velvet, and they had bright round eyes and crinkling noses and wee paws. They popped out of the holes in the ground and stood up to look at Mary and Laura. Their hind legs folded under their haunches, their little paws folded tight to their chests, and they looked exactly like bits of dead wood sticking out of the ground, only their bright eyes glittered. Mary and Laura wanted to catch one to take to Ma. Again and again, they almost had one. Now, what they're really seeing are prairie dogs, which are the much smaller cousin of the groundhog. but they called them gophers, but they're not. They're prairie dogs. The gopher would stand perfectly still until you were sure you had him this time. Then, just as you touched him, he wasn't there. There was only his round hole in the ground. Laura ran and couldn't catch one. Mary sat perfectly still beside a hole waiting for one to come up, and just beyond her reach, gophers scampered merrily, and gophers sat up and looked at her, but not one ever came out of that hole. Once a shadow floated across the grass, and every gopher vanished. A hawk was sailing overhead. It was so close that Laura saw its cruel, round eye turned downward to look at her. She saw its sharp beak and its savage claws curled ready to pounce. But the hawk saw nothing but Laura and Mary and round empty holes in the ground. It sailed away, looking somewhere else for its dinner. Then all the little gophers came up again. It was nearly noon then. The sun was almost overhead. So Laura and Mary picked flowers from the weeds, and they took the flowers to Ma instead of a gopher. Ma was folding the dry clothes. The little panties and petticoats were whiter than snow, warm from the sun, and smelling like the grass. Ma laid them in the wagon. She took the flowers. She admired equally the flowers that Laura gave her and the flowers that Mary gave her, and she put them together in a tin cup full of water. She set them on the wagon step to make the camp pretty. Then she split 2 cold corn cakes and spread them with molasses. She gave one to Mary and one to Laura, and that was their dinner, and it was very good. The noonday meal in the olden times, and still on many farms today, was called dinner instead of lunch. And then what we would call dinner was called supper, which many of us call it supper. But so their lunch wasn't a word that they used. Where is a papoose, Ma? Laura asked. Oh, don't speak with your mouth full, Laura, said Ma. So Laura chewed and swallowed, and she said, I want to see a papoose. Mercy on us, Ma said. Whatever makes you want to see Indians? We will see enough of them, more than we want to, I wouldn't wonder. Well, they wouldn't hurt us, would they? Mary asked. Mary was always good. She never spoke with her mouth full. No, Ma said, don't get such an idea into your head. Why don't you like Indians, Ma? Laura asked, and she caught a drip of molasses with her tongue. I just don't like them, and don't lick your fingers, Laura, said Ma. Well, this is Indian country, isn't it? Laura said. What did we come to their country for if you don't like them? Ma said she didn't know whether this was Indian country or not. She didn't know where the Kansas line was. But whether or no, the Indians would not be here long. Pa had word from a man in Washington that the Indian Territory would be open to settlement soon. It might already be open to settlement. They could not know because Washington was so far away. Then Ma took the sad iron out of the wagon and heated it by the fire. All right, sad iron is something we need to look at a picture of again. It's easy to describe the other things, but sad irons are something you should look. This is the prairie version of an iron, and believe me, it was probably very difficult to use, if you ask me. But it's what they used. Let's see if it is in here. Look at the eyes. Maybe it's not. I can find a picture of it. No, I don't see one in my book. Well, let's hope there's one in our book. Oh, there it is. So if you look on the next page, you can see Ma ironing, and that's a sad iron. It kind of looks like an iron at our house, except that it was metal on the bottom, just a big chunk of metal, and then it had a metal handle, usually with a wood in the center, and so you stuck it in the fire, or you stuck it on a stove, and you just let the metal heat up until it was super, super hot. And then you used a cloth or a cushion of some sort so you didn't get burned, and then you would iron with it. It was very heavy, and it moved across, and you could iron clothes, and they ironed sheets and pillowcases, lots of things we don't iron today, until it got cold, and then you had to put it back in the fire and let it heat up again, and then you could use it again for a while. So ironing would take hours to do, hours to do. But they wanted everything to be as beautiful as possible, and pioneer women would have ironed and ironed and ironed. They washed one day and ironed everything the next day. That was just the way they would. She sprinkled a dress for Mary and a dress for Laura and a little dress for baby Carrie and her own sprig calico. She spread a blanket and a sheet on the wagon seat, and she ironed the dresses. Baby Carrie slept in the wagon. Laura and Mary and Jack lay on the shady grass beside it because now the sunshine was hot. Jack's mouth was open and his red tongue hung out. His eyes blinked sleepily. Ma hummed softly to herself while the iron smoothed all the wrinkles out of the little dresses. All around them, to the very edge of the world, there was nothing but grasses weaving in the wind. Far overhead, a few white puffs of cloud sailed in the thin blue air. Laura was very happy. The wind sung a low, rustling song in the grass. Grasshoppers rasping quivered up from an immense prairie. A buzzing came faintly from all the trees in the creek bottoms. But all these sounds made a great, warm, happy silence. Laura had never seen a place she liked so much as this place. She didn't know she had gone to sleep until she woke up. Jack was on his feet, wagging his stump tail. The sun was low, and Pa was coming across the prairie. Laura jumped up and ran, and his long shadow stretched to meet her in the waving grasses. He held up the game in his hand for her to see. He had a rabbit, the largest rabbit she had ever seen, and 2 plump prairie hens. Laura jumped up and down and clapped her hands and squealed. Then she caught hold of his other sleeve and hippity-hopped through the grasses beside him. This country's cram-jammed with game, he told her. I saw 50 deer if I saw one, and antelope, squirrels, rabbits, birds of all kinds. The creek's full of fish. He said to Ma, I tell you, Caroline, there's everything we want here. We can live like kings. And that was a wonderful supper. They sat by the campfire and ate the tender, savory, flavory meat until they could eat no more. When at last Laura set down her plate, she sighed with contentment. She didn't want anything more in the world. The last color was fading from the enormous sky, and all the level land was shadowy. The warmth of the fire was pleasant because the night wind was cool. Phoebe birds called sadly from the woods down by the creeks. For a little while, a mockingbird sang. Then the stars came out, and the birds were still. Softly Pa's fiddle sang in the starlight. Sometimes he sang a little, and sometimes the fiddle sang alone. Sweet and thin and far away, the fiddle went on singing. None knew thee but to love thee, thou dear one of my heart. The large bright stars hung down from the sky. Lower and lower they came, quivering with music. Laura gasped, and Ma came quickly. What is it, Laura? She asked, and Laura whispered, the stars were singing. Oh, you've been asleep, Ma said. It is only the fiddle, and it's time for little girls were in bed. She undressed Laura in the firelight and put her nightgown on and tied her nightcap and tucked her into bed. But the fiddle was still singing in the starlight. The night was full of music, and Laura was sure that part of it came from the great bright stars swinging so low above the prairie. And that takes us to chapter 5 for the next time. So, our word that we were supposed to look for in the chapter came right away at the very beginning, and it said wicker ring, and it's talking about the horses and their eating. If you've ever been around horses, they make all kinds of noises. They make neigh noises, and that's not a wicker sound. Wicker sounds kind of that kind of a noise that they make when they eat or when they're angry. Kinda, I don't know, when they're bothered by something, but it's kind of a huffing type of noise that a horse makes when it's particularly when, I guess, when it's eating is when I've heard it the most. So, or it's talking to another horse. In this case, they argue. Yeah, they were not happy with one another because one of them was eating the other's corn and then it bit him. So, wicker is a sound a horse makes. A huffing sound. All right, so I'm going to hold that up so you can read it, and then you can write it down. Wicker, a sound a horse makes, a huffing sound. Now, I'm going to move right on. If you need to pause the video to copy it down, do that, and then start it back up again. All right, the other thing we were doing in this chapter was working on our main idea. So we want to take our trifold, and we want to go to the boxes right in the middle here, and we're going to write down who or what the chapter is about, and then what they were doing. So in this chapter, let me write who and what on my board. Okay, so who this chapter was about? Well, this chapter is not about just one person, is it? It's about all of Laura's family. So we're going to write the Ingalls family. Okay, so who is the chapter about? The Ingalls family. And then what are they doing in this camp on the high prairie? Well, they're camping and hunting and exploring. So I'm going to write camping, hunting, and exploring on the prairie. Okay, 6 to 8 words, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. So you want to write down camping, hunting, and exploring on the prairie. Who? The Ingalls family. Camping, hunting, and exploring on the prairie. Again, pause the video if you are not done, but I need to move on. All right, so now at the very bottom of the page, you are going to write a sentence. I know at school I don't ask you to do that very often, and we usually cross it off, but since we're doing this through video and at home, I want to make sure you understand what a main idea is. So I'm going to ask you to take the who and the what, add some words to it, and make a sentence telling the main idea all together. And then you're going to let's just do audio of it, because you also need to tell me if you were able to try molasses. You want to tell me what you thought about that. So you're going to read me your main idea sentence, and then number 2, if you could try molasses, and if you can't, that's okay. I mean, we're at home. If we were at school, I would bring it and have you try it, and then you could tell me about it, but we're not at school. So you can tell me about it if you're able to. All right, see you next time.